at ya. At ya. Tell you what's master. Coming at ya. Coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster. Coming at ya. At ya. Tell you what's master.
All right. Welcome to the Cut the Bull podcast. I obviously am Will Reilly, one of your three hosts, along with Christy Kelly. Still rocking the headset today. We've decided to bring back that intro. And Brooks Crenshaw, who all of you are coming to know and love. And tonight we are talking to Talia Bongolan Schwartz about a bunch of things. We're going to talk about a number of issues as we usually do with influencer guests, but we're going to open with the reason that we brought her in, which is quote unquote leaving the left. So I guess I'll toss out the first question. And I have a little sheet of these written down. So you were someone who pretty famously quote unquote left the political kind of woke movement during really the peak of that around 2020, 2021. When people were kneeling in front of gilded statues of George Floyd and so on. What made that happen? Why'd you make that move and then decide to talk about it pretty notably?
Yeah, so thank you guys for having me on. To take away some credit from myself, I would say that my ideological turn really started right after peak woke. So during peak woke, I was peak woke. I was bowing. During the summer of 2020, I'm from New York originally. I live in Hawaii now, but I flew back to New York to be in the city for the protests because I felt, it's very cringe to say today, but I felt like my body was necessary on the front lines. Like the fight was not as strong in Hawaii. I need to go be, at home where the fight was really taking it to the man. And so I was there, I was doing, what did they call it? Where we would go and wait outside of the jails for people who had been released. And I was driving people home, giving them rides when they would get out of jail for being arrested for protesting. I was sleeping at City Hall when there was that week span where they occupied City Hall. So I was all in. What started my ideological turn away from the left was ironically probably a similar journey for other American Jews that's happened since October 7th. But in May 2021 was the last sort of war flare-up between Israel and Gaza. And up until that point, I was a progressive in good standing with the small asterisk that I was a Zionist, whatever that means. I was a Jew who liked Israel. And that had never been much of a problem for me before. I knew that it was the point of disagreement that I had with my fellow travelers, but it had never really presented itself as an issue. I was out doing the weekly Friday afternoon Black Lives Matter protest. I was the one showing up with all the signs in my trunk. And then very suddenly in the middle of May 2021, people started bringing signs to these BLM protests of Zionism is racism, end Israeli apartheid. And I was being asked personally if I condemn the murder of Palestinian babies. And that was the beginning, and that was really, really, really difficult for me. At that point, I was not giving up on the left, but I was feeling betrayed by the left. It was the beginning of, I didn't leave the left left me. And so it started with sort of my group of friends was my protesting group of friends and my radical feminist friends. And so all of that kind of slowly went away. But I held on to my progressive bona fides for as long as I could. And then sort of slowly and then all at once, I kind of officially left the left. Probably over the course of a year and a half is when I was sort of officially and unapologetically done identifying as a Democrat, even let alone a progressive.
Sure. One thing that's kind of interesting when you say, we've all used the term peak woke. I mean, you said during peak woke when people were showing up at jails to bail out protesters and sometimes other inmates. I was doing this. But I mean, there's more to it than that. what does woke mean to you? Like, what do you have to believe to be woke? Which seems to be something that transcends everything from radical feminism, which I spar with online but understand, to pro-Palestine activism. Like, what's the unifying thread there? What must you think?
Well, the unifying thread is that the world can be broken into oppressors and oppressed peoples, and that justice by any means necessary on behalf of oppressed peoples is justified and necessary. That basically, if it's offensive, it's wrong. We should be going out of our way to celebrate and amplify marginalized voices. It's a little, overdone to say it, but it's essentially the oppression Olympics is what
Sure.
woke is.
Now, this is my last comment. I think we're going to flip to Christy and Brooks, but I mean, like, comment and a question. The obvious point that I've made pretty often as a not entirely unsuccessful consultant is that the groups that are involved in the woke movement totally disagree with and dislike one another, and actually have many different relative power positions as versus one another. So if you're a feminist, for example, I probably would disagree with this in the modern USA, post-Civil Rights Act, but you could say, well, women have less systemic power than men do. And that's a reasonable, coherent argument. But if you're talking about groups of men that are focused on the oppression of women, it would be hard to get more intense with that than, say, the Muslim world. So what is the enemy that, like, a Western feminist and an Arab Muslim would share? Is it just like success, or is there something more coherent than that?
Well, what's the enemy that a jihadi Muslim and a woke progressive in America would share? A rich Jew. That's the enemy. That would be the peak enemy there. But a rich white Jew, I guess. But yeah, I mean, you're pointing out what many people have remarked upon, which is sometimes known as the Red-Green Alliance, the alliance of this jihadi sort of totalitarian. It feels silly to even call it a right-wing movement, but it's not progressive. Jihadism is not known for its progressivism. Coming together with socialists, basically. This is what we saw as sort of the fall of Iran, was this Red-Green Alliance. And I mean, we've seen this in sort of Palestinian activism too. There's the sort of more traditional jihadi groups, and then there was the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which is ostensibly a socialist group that was responsible for flying planes down. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it doesn't need to. You're not encouraged to look at any of the contradictions. I mean, I remember reading John McWhorter's book, Woke Racism, and he lays out just so plainly in the beginning of the book the internal contradictions of the woke worldview. And so people who are in this mindset, particularly the progressives, the jihadis, not so much. I don't think they're confused about what they believe. But the progressives, the wokes, you're just not supposed to think about it. It's just like one giant state of cognitive dissonance, basically.
Yeah, and the last actual sentence for me for a bit, but I mean, the jihadis know exactly what they want. It's spelled out in a lot of jihadist writing. They want to beat the West, kill all the men, rape all the women, and make Islam a global civilization. It's actually extremely coherent. Like, I'm an enemy of it, but they basically want to use the woke people as stupid prey to get them into society. But
the woke people will do it. The woke people aren't even being used. They're almost leading the charge. Yes, sure, these people are a little regressive. And yes, sure, I would want women to have more rights in their society. I would want gay people to have rights in their society. But this is the product of their oppression. It is our fault that they are like this. And we can't expect them to do any better because they're suffering. And people who are suffering are obviously going to be murderous, racist, sexist people.
That is such a good pitch. Like, sign me up. You converted me.
Yeah. To Islam, though, unfortunately. All right. Brooks, it looks like you were ready to respond there and a couple other times. What's your take on all this? I mean, any question you want to lead with, really?
Well, there's a couple of themes that are running through the conversation already. one is why the left continually cannibalizes itself. And I wrote a piece on that at Daily Caller where we actually talked about the anti-Jewish bubbling up that was happening. A lot of the campuses were not welcoming Jews within the group. And, that was the impetus for the article. But, whether you're talking about that or women and trans men in sports or LGBT or TQ or both, there's these schisms that are forming. And it seems to be that the through line is you have your identity so long as you share our Marxist worldview. But if you turn that in, you no longer are granted the oppressed identity that you were granted as a member of the group. And as somebody who dabbled in a religious cult in my late teens, early 20s, I recognize that when I see it. I did that before the military, and all the wokesters that I've seen, they share that same cult mentality. And I think that's where Islam overlaps. It's the overlap of the death cult, really. But
yeah,
in terms of your experience, were you ever like excommunicated from the protest because you were Jewish?
of course not. These are progressive movements, right? It's not because you're Jewish. It's because you're a Zionist.
Yeah.
My grandma was Jewish. I don't hate Jewish people. I have Jewish friends. So no, not in any explicit terms. The funny thing about Jews, there's a lot of funny things about Jews. But we're the perfect scapegoat in many ways because we are a part of every movement. And so there were plenty of Jews on the other side of this who were able to, that was the Jew assigned to talk to the good Jew assigned to talk to the bad Jew to explain why she was being bad. So no, it was never explicitly like and this is the interesting thing, right? Is left-wing anti-Semitism, it typically doesn't have that overt kind of, the resentment is all still there. They're still kind of foaming at the mouth, but it's not as explicit. And a lot of these people probably don't hate Jews consciously. Like if you were to really interrogate them, they don't hate Jewish people. They hate oppression. They hate capitalism. They hate white supremacy, and they see the Jewish state and Jewish power as part and parcel of these things that they hate. But they would swear up and down they don't hate Jews, and they're probably telling the truth.
So, yeah, I mean, I was actually just going to make a one-sentence point here, but I think there's a problem when it comes to the left dealing with Jews, because the idea is that underperformance is caused by oppression. It's totally univariate. The one thing that makes you fail is that someone else is causing that. They're holding you down. So when you actually look at these groups like Jews and Nigerians and Asians that are the most successful people in the country, that the model just doesn't work. And I think a social scientist would normally say, we're actually not that woke. Okay, that theory was wrong. But woke people, being religious types, can't. So the idea is the Jews are sneakily conniving their way into the upper echelons of power. It's classic anti-Semitism.
Yes.
I mean, if you were involved in Occupy a decade ago, it was an ad-busters movement, but the stuff people were saying was right out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Look at who the bankers are over a drink. But Christy, what do you think? Who are the bankers? Who are the woke? Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I had several things as you guys were talking. First of all, Brooks, you casually threw out that you were in a religious cult. So that's going to be filed back here for a different conversation. We're going to have to get back to that.
It was gray, but they had cult-like behavior.
I'm he just casually threw that out and went on. But Talia, I guess the question that I had was, now I think everyone knows that Black Lives Matter, was pretty much a scam. But when you're in it, does anything about you say, hey, I have fair skin and I'm showing up to this Black Lives rally, and here are these people that do not like the Black nuclear family, don't too much like straight Black men, and hey, here are all these Antifa people, and maybe not too many Black people that are even straight women at this, BLM movement. Was there any light bulb that went off when you were still part of the left that was like, something doesn't feel right?
No, 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 no. Christy, first of all, we have to care about, I'm getting in my mindset, right? So yes, we have to care about Black men. They're sort of, they're right up there at the pedestal. However, they're men, so they're contributing to the oppression of Black women. If they were trans, that might be something else. But so no, the fact that you don't see, no, you don't think too much about that. Why aren't there that many Black women? Well, white people, we're supposed to have our bodies on the line. You know, when you're at these protests, it's literally white people to the front, you know, create a barrier in front of them. This is like just very explicitly how it would go down. White bodies to the front, create a barrier between the police and the Black bodies. And it was this verbiage, bodies, white bodies and Black bodies. Also, I'm married to, like, I think I sent Wilfred the picture when he first put out a call for this episode of People Who Left the Left. I sent him a picture from the summer of 2020, which is me with my Lesbian Jews for Black Trans Lives sign in New York City. So, no, I mean, my whole worldview was like, so, because when I was there were lots of Black trans people out on the streets, right? And things like this. And so, no, I wasn't thinking. And had you said to me, like, oh, this emphasis on the nuclear family, that was a racist dog whistle. I remember having this conversation with my father at the time. And he said something to that effect of not even specifically about Black people, because he was talking about sort of, you know, inner city Hispanics too. But talking about, you know, like at a certain point does family and culture come into play? And I just remember like trying to shame him. So luckily my dad couldn't really be shamed because he was born in 1950 and he's not changing very quickly. But I was like, no, like, Dad, oh, like, what a racist thing to say. It is white people who created the institutions that have forced, you know, Black and brown people into the position that they find themselves in now. But it is racist to assume that there's anything that could be that it's Black or brown people's jobs to alleviate that situation. So no, honestly, when I was in it, I didn't see, none of that struck me, like that didn't breach the cognitive dissonance. If anything, so I gave like sort of the quick story at the beginning of what this looked like, but it really started with the race stuff, right? My ideological turn. And I remember when I was really in this, you know, you're supposed to listen to Black voices, listen to trans voices, right? You listen to the most marginalized. So I'm following a bunch of these radical activists on social media and stuff, and they're just constantly talking about white people as essentially the devil. Then I went on Clubhouse and fell into some like Nation of Islam and Black Hebrew Israelite groups, and they actually believe that white people are the literal devil. So it becomes it gets more literal in certain communities. But I remember like the only real cognitive dissonance that I remember is like, I know I didn't think that it applied to me. Like I knew that I wasn't evil and I wasn't a devil, but I also never really saw myself as white. And it's not a fight that now, to bring it back, I don't care about any of this stuff now. Like, yes, I'm white. I'm white and I'm proud. Like, I'm not holding a sign about it. But I used to, like, there are a lot of Jews who get really touchy about being called white. And I used to be one of those, and I'm not anymore because I think it's silly. Like, my skin is white. I don't know why I would fight that. It's a unnecessary battle. But so I didn't see myself as the evil problem, but I saw what they were saying as like essentially true or directionally true and important enough. But, you know, a lot of this came down when like to breaking down the race thing and being a Jew, I think maybe sort of helped me see some of this stuff of how ridiculous some of these lines were being drawn and some of the rules around it. Like I remember I got yelled at for calling Whoopi Goldberg by her legal name. I was calling her Karen Elaine Johnson. And this was after she made the Holocaust was white on white crime quip.
Dead name and Whoopi.
Yeah. And Yeah, I was dead naming Whoopi. And I was reprimanded for that because Whoopi is a Black woman, a descendant of slaves, and she didn't choose her family name. Like her given name was like the result of, was it a slave name? Was it a whatever? Like that wasn't her, that wasn't a chosen name. She chose this name, Whoopi Goldberg, and you have to respect that. And I remember just being like, well, yeah, my family didn't choose our name either. Like Jews in the diaspora in Europe were given names based on their occupation. Like my last name essentially meant like blacksmith, like that's not my family name. So, but I wasn't allowed to say those things. And I remember another conversation. I mean, were just so stupid. People are really dumb in this movement. But I also got reprimanded for using the word diaspora because I was told this is an Afrocentric word. And I was like,
cultural appropriation.
Yes, that was the accusation.
At least you didn't say something like niggardly, which has gotten dozens of people fired. I mean, yeah, it's not a very high G population.
Yeah, and I was just like, the term was literally coined to describe the Jewish experience of leaving the land of Israel, and it accurately describes the African diaspora. Those are probably the two groups that it most accurately describes. But like, of course, I can use the word diaspora, and just like all of these little struggle sessions started to add up, and I started to realize that the people on the left were hypocrites. Basically, my people were being hypocrites about the race stuff, and then from there, I realized that we were kind of lying about the sex stuff vis-a-vis feminism and sexism. And then the last thing that I kind of challenged to myself was the gender stuff and all of the trans stuff. So that's sort of how I see the process. There were like 3 pillars that I challenged, being race, sort of feminism, and then gender. Yeah. The race one was fun.
Well, so that's a really interesting summary of the reaction to the crazy left. I mean, what question, this comes out of a conversation Brooks and I really had at the gym today. But I mean, now we're seeing sort of the rising crazy right, when it comes to anti-Semitism or the total backlash to like first wave feminism, like all you broads shouldn't be able to vote. What's your take on kind of the quote unquote dissident right? When you see like Ian Carroll is his name, or Martyr Maid, I mean, guys that are interesting to debate online, but now being treated as public experts and saying things like the state of Israel shouldn't exist. That's a paraphrase. What's your take on the stuff that's coming out of the right to counter woke? Are you just like a normal taxpayer who hates both, or is there more defense of that? Like, what do you think?
Oh, I definitely don't have more defense of that. So it's very interesting, sort of like intellectually and sociologically, it's very interesting that the right is sort of like doing the thing. It's like it is just like very obviously reactionary, and you could argue that it's a reaction to the woke left, and I would agree with that assessment. I'm very disturbed by it, and for me it kind of feels like I spent my whole life on the left, and then I kind of was slowly moving away, and then I finally, probably about a year ago, realized like, the left didn't leave me. I changed a tremendous amount of my views. My worldview pretty radically changed. Again, not in a night, over the course of about a year and a half, but I realized, no, I actually moved to the right. And then I finally got comfortable with that fact. And now I'm like, oh, I don't really have a home on the right either. And I know that's not like entirely true, but it's a reminder, it's a whiplash reminder of how I felt when I first was feeling so alienated from the left was. And this is, again, a common Jewish experience, not to make it all about the Jews, but this sort of political homelessness of like, not just do you not really fit on either side, they don't want you. And I'm kind of conscious of that. Like, I don't want to be where I'm not welcome, So I'm very disturbed by it. There's so many things going on. I mean, this is the dissident right, the woke right, the alt-right, whatever we want to call it. This is the outgrowth of the alt-right that was really kind of popular to talk about back in like 2015, 2016, 2017. But it is, again, we can lay some blame at the feet of the left, because the left was calling Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro alt-right, and so now it's like, what do we do with the people who are just sort of loudly like proclaiming these things proudly without, it feels like without enough pushback, I guess without enough mainstream pushback. And I think what I see as someone who, I've never been on the right, I moved towards the right, and now I'm sort of standing outside the door. And I voted for Trump in November, my first time ever voting for a Republican. But now I'm feeling like, I think a main reason that Trump won, or the Republicans won, because Trump was not my favorite person. I would have gotten to a Republican vote much sooner had Trump not been the nominee, but I still came around. But I think the reason that the Republicans and that Trump won was because they were just seen as the less crazy option. And the left was seen as so fucking crazy because they would not police their own crazies. They refused to condemn, control, draw any boundaries or borders between themselves and the lunatics on the left. And it feels like that's just exactly what the right is doing right now. And when the right is being asked to account for this, they're saying, and stop with the cancel culture. You can't tell me who to talk to. And there's hints of truth in that. We don't want censorship. We don't want mob culture just deciding that someone, is guilty of wrongthink. But if you don't condemn the crazies, then they become you.
Yeah,
you become them.
That's a great kind of break point there. Like, yeah, you have to, at some point, like, as the radical left said, we're moving the Overton over here. And then as the Jordan Petersons and so on said, well, we want to totally open Overton window on our side then as well. I mean, the end result of that is that stuff's going to slither out like the Holocaust didn't happen. And the question is, do you kind of close the nightclub door a little bit? Say, okay, no, we are going to sanction that. Christy Kelly, you also appear to be a woman. I don't want to misgender either of you. But how do you feel about this? Like, I looked at the Repeal the 19th petition today. I thought this was just some weird incel shit, as using the language I'd normally use. But it's got you go on like Yandex and search where you can find anything. It's like 4 billion signatures. I mean, so Google tries to hide some of that, but it's out there and it's significant. How do you feel about that, Christy? Like, is this just are those 4 million people from all around the world and this doesn't really matter? Or does the right also have to police the crazy, get back in the kitchen, no Jewish people stuff? What do you think?
So I think I've been doing this on and off for, maybe close to a year with you guys. And I hear you guys talk a lot about the gropers and the, incels and all the far right people. But I never really ran across them until recently, like the whole stabbing death of the kid in Texas. And then all of a sudden I was like, holy shit, like all of these people just like descended on my page. And I'm like, this is what Will and Charles had been talking about all this time. Like, they're really out there, but they're not really in the real world. So I am, registered Republican. I'm, in the Republican streets. I'm in the Republican Party. I do work in the Republican Party, and I don't run across those elements. So I'm really torn between, I don't think that we need to address them because I think it kind of brings more spotlight on them. And I think now they are just kind of this cringy internet thing. But if they get more mainstream, then I think it is something that we need to address. I also refuse, as the Black token Republican, to be the one that has to be condemning racism or sexism. Like, I refuse. Or I even refuse to be, the culture, the Black culture, when they're like, oh, your culture. No, I refuse. Like, you guys want conservatism to be about individualism. I'm an individualist, and this is me. This is, I'm not the spokesperson for everything that's wrong in every corner of Republicanism.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you and Talia have both said that. It's something like that in passing. And that seems like really good advice as a businesswoman, actually. Like, your role in the office shouldn't be being the racism and sexism condemner who everyone comes to hate. So ideally, someone else would kind of step up and do some of that. Brooks, what do you think?
Well, so, this reminds me of some of the conversations that you and I've had ad nauseum. What Talia is describing is, the fact that fascism historically has always been an overreaction to communism. And, I think that the voices that, whether or not they're to the mainstream yet is debatable, with regard to Christie's commentary. I tend to agree with her that they're not. I tend to think that the open market of free speech shuts that down inevitably, which is what we want. But, that's one of the trade-offs with Elon buying Twitter is, everybody that was off was able to get back on. And so you're getting a lot more of those voices. But this is where we test the whole, the cure for bad speech is better speech. And so, I'm down with that. The left versus right, paradigm, I saw this happen with the left when true believers in liberal values like free speech in the ballot box, like Barry Weiss and Brett Weinstein, they noticed that there were other lefties that had said all of those things up until the point that they had power. And that's no different than our side. We have people on our side that are saying, yeah, censorship is bad and we want free speech and we want fair elections until we get enough power. And there are people in our ranks too that we're going to have to keep an eye on. And so I kind of view the experience of the left in watching Barry Weiss and Weinstein and others with whom I am aligned with the new lines being drawn. We might have historically been, at some odds with regard to being political fellows, but, in the basic questions, I'm aligned with that. And so I think that we're going to have to police our side as we've gained more power. The same thing is inevitable because this isn't a left or right thing. This is a human dynamic. Mm-hmm. And we have, 5% psychopaths that the internet is scaling in a way that we've never had before in human history. And so figuring out how to police that without what the left social media platforms attempted. It's got to be something else. It can't be, well, we're just going to shut off your account for saying wrong thing. But yeah, I think that what has happened to the left is happening to the right, and we need to follow the lead of those on the left that stood on our side of the line.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting, so I think everyone to some extent gives an edited view of who they are in public. Like when you say a lot of people on our side would take power if they could. I mean, if I could, I'd make myself king of the world. But I mean, so yeah,
you're an amoralist businessman.
Yes, this has become a joke on this show, but I'm not kidding. Like if I had the power, anyway, whatever, we don't need to discuss that. But I do think that all this comes into play. Like one point, Brooks, you're touching on is it's just that people are different online where no one can hit them. Yeah. I mean, so yes. I think that I do think this is about 5% of people. But I think that a lot of these people that are quote unquote groypers with the anon images of like Roman statue choking woman, this kind of thing. Like, I think those are real people you'd meet in like the junior executive ranks. Like as consultants, we'll probably all talk to them. There's just, you don't show that in public. The teeth come out when they can, when it's dark. So there's part of that. But also a lot of them are just from other fucking countries. Like every time I've done any background research, like who owns America First Post or something, it's always like Abdul Abaziz Akbar, and I'm not a bigot at all, but it's like, okay, I begin to see why this Arab businessman dislikes Israel. So there are a lot of levels there.
I know some of the guys that you're talking about in the American context, but what they all seem to have in common is that women reject them, and for good reason. Like that's not a small thing.
But real.
Yeah.
No, there's a guy, I want to hear what Talia and Christy say about this, but there's a guy, Scott Alexander, I believe, that runs, or Scott something, we'll look it up, post it in the credits, but who runs the Date Psych Network on Twitter, and who's actually done a lot of large polls of men and women on what they think about sex and relationships. And it's surprisingly mundane. I mean, most people want to sleep with their partner a couple times a week if they don't feel abused. It's like the exact opposite of the panic on Twitter, which is great to see. But one of the things he did that became controversial was a poll of incels, where he asked them questions about varsity athletic participation, military participation, hobbies. And what he found was that a lot of these guys were having trouble with women because they were very unappealing. They weren't physically fit. They were poor. They didn't have game. And so they were attributing that to just like random stuff, like I'm under 6'5". And like, I mean, I'm under 6'5" and I'm no great beauty. I mean, it's not that hard to go to a club and talk to somebody, buy a drink, son. But these people just didn't have the ability to do that. They hadn't been trained to do that. It was really sad, and it was exactly what all of you guys have been saying.
Well, you see a lot of
other
that on the
comments
left.
on this? Because I think we might move to gender ideology.
Yep.
Okay. Excited hand motions.
I have a comment. I'll try not to linger too much, just about the how concerned should we be about this stuff on the right. I'm pretty concerned. I think that's because I see the Jews as the canary in the coal mine. And again, just because I don't feel like I'm on strong enough footing to even really say anything. Like I recorded an interview a couple of years ago with Benjamin Boyce, like about 2 years ago, and he released it about a year and a half later. And so if you're not listening closely, it could sound like my ideological turn sort of just happened, like in the wake of October 7th or something. And just the amount of comments of just like, shit libs like this don't get to control our party now that we're in charge. You think just because, and so I'm conscious of that, and I don't want to control anybody. Like that's not what I'm looking to do anyway. I'm still very much learning and enjoying the process. The biggest part of like unwokening and my ideological shift was like not being married to anything, realizing that so many of the beliefs that I held as really deeply held beliefs that I had never interrogated before. So I'm like very open to things, but I'm pretty concerned about what's going on the right. You're right. A lot of these people are sort of anonymous scrapers online, but they are real people. And they have really popular mainstream mouthpieces for what they're doing. And I'm also really pessimistic because I don't know what we should do about it. We absolutely should not be reinstating the social media of old, right? Where you just get knocked off for wrong think. I don't want cancel culture to come back. Again, my ideological turn really brought me back to free speech because I realized quickly, at that last war with Israel and Palestine, like, wow, free speech is pretty important because if it's President Rashida Tlaib next time and Zionism is declared as hate speech, then I'm in a world of trouble. So I don't like what the Trump administration is doing with anti-Semitic speech and stuff like that. So I'm against all of that stuff, but I don't know how to fix it because Tucker Carlson is not small. He's the main purveyor of this stuff right now. He's doing it more carefully and more thoughtfully and he's gentler. Candace Owens is doing this stuff right now. And Candace Owens has major mainstream appeal. It sounds silly to call her mainstream.
When you say doing this stuff, can you define that? Or give an example?
Sure. Well, I mean, the obvious examples are like the World War II revisionism that's been going on lately. Projecting, repeating this stuff, presenting this stuff to large audiences of right-wing, center, curious, conspiracy inclined people, giving them all of this information, presenting it as new, shiny, and woke almost. Like I just woke up to this news of the reality of the real power structure, right? And it's the Jews that are on whatever. So this is I feel like there's a lot of big people who are playing with fire, honestly. And just the fighting within the right concerns me. It concerns me that there is such a thirsty group on the right trying to like take down the Daily Wire. Like the Daily Wire is not perfect, but are those not conservative men? Are Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles and Ben Shapiro and are these not conservative men? So I'm really concerned, and I do see sort of Candace and Tucker as the heads of the snake. I mean, heads of the snake. I guess I'm concerned too because I think this stuff is, and again, I don't know what to do about it because I don't want to turn this off. But Joe Rogan had the appeal of being the everyman, and anyone non-political people listen to his stuff. And if you've been listening to his stuff for the last, several years, you're hearing some pretty crazy stuff being presented as new and true, even if it's not new and not true. And I see even like the Theo Vaughn lately, like he's a totally sort of apolitical. He's like, I'm the funny, dumb guy. And I do find him funny and entertaining. And he'll have on, Candace Owens and sort of these types of people on one day, and then I look back and he has on Ben Affleck and what's his face of Meta,
Zuckerberg.
Zuckerberg was just on. And so I'm like, this audience is sort of getting whiplash of like these normal mainstream figures, and then also these like conspiracy theorists. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't have a prescription, but I am pretty concerned.
I did have a comment. So I definitely do hear major elements of liberalism still when you talk. So I would definitely
I'm a
say
liberal. Oh yeah, I am a liberal. But in fact, when I had my ideological change, what I felt like what I was first reacting to viscerally was the illiberalism of my side. That was what I first sort of woke up to when I was leaving the left.
Little L liberalism.
Yeah, and I feel like when I was I used to think Republicans were evil, right? Racist, and if not explicitly racist, then just too privileged to care. This was what I said with a straight face, and I believed it. So when I first started like talking to Republicans and realizing that a lot of these people are really thoughtful and smart, I was like, oh, they're liberal. They believe in free speech. They believe in individualism. You know, they believe in all of these things that I believe in. So I still do consider myself a liberal. I don't know what to make of any of these things. But
to clarify, you mean like classical liberal, right? Like you favor
yes.
free speech, open markets, men, women, blacks, whites have roughly equal rights, that kind of thing.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I guess what I hear is still a tinge of, progressive, which is probably why you didn't become, all the way to the right.
Is it the Candace Owens stuff?
Well, first of all, matter of fact, I don't even like really say her name. I call her CO. Like, no, seriously, because the second you say that on the feed, it'll just be inundated. I've never been a CO fan, per se. I don't watch her. My daughter loves her. My 16-year-old loves her. My husband loves her. I've never been one.
Yeah.
But I also can understand. So if I can play devil's advocate, I think anything having to do with Jews has been like this holy grail, like thou shalt not touch, thou shalt not say anything ever bad, And I think what people are doing now with the whole free speech thing is questioning things. So like when they question, was Hitler all that bad, right? I think everybody's like, oh my God, how could you ever say that? It's Earth. Can we ask the question and examine it on Earth? And I think that's kind of the tension that we're feeling. Like, are they going too far in examining these ideas? Or do we really believe in free speech and free thought and freedom of everything, and even things having to do with classes that have been kind of untouchable? We can pursue it.
Well, what you're describing, I mean, like whether you're talking about drugs or guns or anytime a group of people has been infantilized for a period, when they get their rights back, they're going to be teenagers for a little bit. And so like, that's what I think you're describing, is because, people are playing with ideas in the same way that, if we were to legalize most drugs in a pharmaceutical setting, you'd have a generation where you learn not to do it because of what happened to your uncle. You're going to have that generation of mistakes because we're coming out of an infantilized state, and speech is no different. I think I've reserved, I talked about this with Will today at the gym. I was like, what do you think about Tucker? He's I'm not really sure about him, with some of the stuff. So like, I'm seeing the same thing that Talia is. I'm giving some benefit of the doubt in the short run that we're talking with people that are playing with ideas, but I want those hosts to push back. Like when Candace Owens was on, when CO was on Joe Rogan, I really, that's the thing that turned me off to her, because she didn't have her shit together. Like she couldn't defend her ideas, and it made it seem as though she'd gotten to where she was because she was pretty. Like Rogan
I think you just, Brooks, don't want to cut that up, but you just hit on something very important, actually, which is, so I don't think this is entirely organic. Like when I said, I don't think if America First Post is owned by like Ali Akbar, or whatever the full name might be, their critique of Israel's accidental, the civilized Arab countries, the Jews are like a death struggle, that explains it. It's the same thing here. Like there's there are three levels here. One, at some basic level of childlike wisdom development, there's nothing theoretically wrong with questioning anything. Like, we all agree with that.
Mhm.
Level two, I think, though, is it's that Christy outlined this well, but I don't think it's the Jews that have been kind of sacred in America. I certainly don't think that's true. If you look at the pro-Palestine movement, so on, I think that what is almost sacred in the USA is kind of the founding order for the modern world. So, like, the nations that won World War II, which actually included us and the Chinese for all the flaws on both sides, right? But they were in the right. Like, Hitler wanted to bring back Caesar-style conquest and take over the world. He got Tojo on his side. They almost fucking did it. We beat them at the cost of the 30 million American and Soviet dead that we honor at Normandy. And I'm outlining how people would phrase this, but I believe most of it. But all the things that go around that, like the Civil Rights Act, not affirmative action, but the basic rules that gave rights to blacks, Irishmen, women, so on, were good. The first wave of feminism, you can vote now, was good. That, I think, is what is viewed as kind of sacred. Like, we fought back evil in the world with nuclear fire rising over cities and made the modern order. And Americans and Brits do tend to get pretty pissed off if you challenge it. I think it's understandable. But so I think that's what's been sacred. And now there are people questioning it. I don't even, coming from such a business or academic background, have a problem with that, although it personally irritates the hell out of me. But I think that the two things we should ask for are, one, people know what the hell they're talking about. And two, that, yeah, the host kind of pushes back and says, like Martyr Maid, who I like personally, but said, Daryl, said the villain of World War II was Winston Churchill. Like, when someone says that, the other guy has to grab the mic and go, what the fuck, what'd you just say? I mean,
Right.
you can't just nod and say, yeah, a lot of people say that. Yeah, there's a lot of that out there. That's been kind of the Tucker and Joe Rogan approach, or kind of the bro interviewer side. And I think that leaves a lot of people with the impression that Churchill's great opponent was probably the good guy. But Churchill's great opponent was Hitler, right? So, I mean, you really do have to say, a lot of people died in World War II, and most of them were on our side. What's this about Adolf? And I don't see a lot of that personally.
Well, and there's like this overcompensation too. You're right. I think more so what has been the taboo is like the post-war liberal consensus and these types of things.
World. Like, we beat Hitler, women can vote, all the races have to live together. Yeah, like everything. That I think is the taboo.
Yeah. I do worry there's some overcompensation, right? Of like, yes, we should be able to ask the difficult questions. And I'm all for sympathizing with unsympathetic historical figures and movements and trying to understand them. Like, I'm with all that. But there does seem to be a lot of people, maybe on the libertarian right, who just seem to just like hate everything that our country has ever done, any type of foreign intervention, including like participating in the world wars, right? So I see that as a bit of an overcompensation. And yeah, I agree. And this is why I don't have an answer to this, because there's no way to even standardize. Yes, ideally what we want is informed people to push back, not to shut them up, but to enrich the conversation with more information. There's no way to standardize that. In order to create a podcast, you have to have a fact checker on your team, right? And then who decides who the fact checker is? So that's why I'm not very optimistic, frankly, about like where this is all going to go. And maybe, I guess I'm optimistic about America in general. So I do believe, like, I like to believe in the long run that this stuff will all kind of shake out okay. But yeah, I don't really know how we deal with that right now.
Talia, I would say at some point you have to look at these people and you have to just know that they're just not serious people, right? So a lot of the, here I am, I'm doing a podcast, but I'm going to say a lot of the podcaster class, right, and clickbait people are doing it for money and for clicks and to be sensational. And in the back of my mind, when I'm hearing these people, I'm like, they don't believe a word of what they're saying, but they're doing it for the clicks and the money. And I understand how that can be a problem in and of itself.
Yeah. The line that I draw in my mind when I'm listening to somebody is, are they after the truth? Are they in it for, are they playing power games, or are they there for a cash grab and clicks? It's one of those three buckets typically when you're in that field. And I've watched some people be the truth teller for a time, and then it's kind of obvious when they get that one big check and check out. And so like that's where I think the market can correct, because if Rogan doesn't push back enough on some of these figures over the next few years, he might be replaced in the market.
There's also a practical problem there, because I mean, Brooks, you and I both, like, we're starting a business now. We've gone and competed in the market. I mean, like, the market takes a long time to adjust to bias, ignorance, morality, manipulation, and so on. I mean, I'm not panicked about this either, but I actually maybe on the left of the panel today, except for maybe Talia, that doesn't happen all that often. I'll have to say something aggressive about like putting opponents on crosses or something before the show's over. But like, in all seriousness, though, I mean, like, we've talked constantly, all of us have, about the influence of mainstream televised media, that kind of thing. I mean, Joe Rogan has a larger audience than probably the entire MSNBC network. So, I mean, we do need to accept at some point that on the center right in the edge media, I mean, this podcast is not unsuccessful. Like, when you talk, I have 150,000 Twitter followers. Between us, it's probably like 300,000. When people say shit to 300,000 people, much less 16 million, it has the same effect that the traditional media did, I think. So I don't know, like, no one, including me, has really proposed a solution. But yeah, it's problematic. If someone shows up on a podcast, to steal that word, if someone shows up on a podcast with a fucking cutout of Hitler, puts him in the back and says, like, we need to reconsider some things. Like, no, we don't. You know, I think the jury's in on Hitler.
I would push back on, I don't think that they're viewed as the same thing, because, and this goes back to the wine market, I'm not going to tell the whole story again, but like, essentially what we had in the curated mainstream media from Edward R. Murrow, Walter Cronkite on, was this curated, minimum standard of quality that resembled the European wine market, that was just heavily regulated. You couldn't really do much innovating and experimenting. And the US wine market was a free-for-all, and we made the shittiest wine and the best wine because we were able to innovate and experiment. And I think this is the phase in which we're in. And when you're watching a podcast, I don't think there's any allusions to the nobility of a Walter Cronkite as he was held on the pedestal that he was in that era. You know what I'm saying? Because we had 3 gatekeepers on televised networks and a handful of newspapers, and that's the way it is. Like that was the tagline. But like now we've democratized to a point where I don't think we take these figures. I think we're a little more cynical in the way we look at the podcast world. I don't think Rogan is a messiah of any regard. I think I
feel like the opposite is sort of true to a certain extent. Like, because at least with media, with traditional TV personalities, especially going back to Cronkite and stuff like that, you saw them as the expert class, and there was much more respect and reverence and whatever for the expert class. Right. But when it comes to your favorite podcast or your favorite influencer, there's a whole parasocial relationship that extends well beyond what the relationship between, the broadcaster and the person sitting on their couch at home. And I think, yes, we take our commands from on high, or we used to, at least, right, when there was much more trust in these institutions. But I think on a much more human level, we take commands from the people who we trust and believe are like us, who share our values. Like, that's how so many of us develop these beliefs that we haven't necessarily critically thought about ourselves. We've kind of absorbed them from people who, I respect this person, we think alike on all these other things. So if this is their take on this, then that's probably how I think about it too. And so I almost think like maybe they're not being put on the same pedestal, but they are being seen as like much more relatable and
there's almost a buddy
here, though, I think also is that it's the same kind of thing you get into with porn and gambling and a lot of other quote unquote minor vices. Like, adults just kind of look at that and are like, okay, sometimes. But when people are genuinely inexperienced and especially are young, like, you really can have an impact for all the shit that's out in public culture. And like, the example of this for me actually would be Andrew Tate, like no one we're talking about. But like, I did some research on the Tate brothers once for a potential article, like nothing really abusive, but just like, what is the background? And I found out the average age of an Andrew and Tristan Tate fan is like 13. So it's not, and I would suspect this is very true for like Hustler magazine back in the day and so on as well. It's not like normal, successful businessmen and soldiers that are watching these guys for a few tips on game and like judging them, like, hey, he's an asshole, but he knows how to talk to him. It's actually little kids that are getting the full flex of their information set on women from these dudes who are like Bulgarian pimps. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of that. Like, if you're watching, like, when I watch Joe Rogan, it's just like, yeah, Joe's on some bullshit again. And he knows what to do in the gym, though. It's a cynical adult's analysis. But, I mean, if you're watching Joe Rogan and you are 19 and thinking about the army, you have no experience politically, and someone comes on and says, well, we're fighting wars for Israel, I mean, I would suspect that probably does influence you. Christy, what do you think, though? Podcast media, are people more or less cynical than they used to be?
I definitely think people are more cynical, but even with the traditional media, what Tally said before, we had this reverence for them, like, oh, if they're asking this question, they really know what they're talking about. And now we're just like, all these people are just, BS, propaganda people, and we don't even, give them any kind of credence. I think podcasters, you have such a good point. And so I have three girls, I have three daughters. And this is a great point because my youngest one is the only one that is hardcore on the right. And you can see the influence of the media people that she has been following because all of a sudden in 2 years, I want to say, she started doing homesteading stuff and growing stuff and, cooking and, now
Did
she
buy
wants
a
to
Red Wife dress?
basically, no,
No, they're
she's
for
gonna
sale online, like Target sells them.
she's gonna kill me. But she basically, I'm like, well, what do you want to do now? And she has her career, but she's like, that's just a backup. I want to get married and have 10 kids and be a homemaker, right? And if anybody can tell, I mean, I'm a, married, wife, but I'm definitely not a homesteader, right? I'm a professional woman. So that is the power of the media and the podcasters and that whole class of people. It's very powerful, especially, like you said, Will, for the kids. That is spot on.
Well,
Yeah,
I'm,
that's
I see it
genuinely
optimistic.
interesting. Brooks, what's up?
Yeah, I'm optimistic actually about the figure that you put out about the Tate brothers in that it's 13, 14, because like that's when young men are getting the most rejection from women or from girls once they take an interest. And I was listening to Peterson on Rogan, and Peterson had a good take on this, and I think that's right. Is that Tate is not a role model, but the question is being a monster better than being an incel? And I would say yes. But
yeah, I'd rather be a wolf than a sheep. But I mean, like, there's so many other options, like shepherd, sheepdog in that parable.
Right. What's better than being the monster? And I'm not terribly alarmed at 13 to 15-year-olds following Tate, because they're going to figure this is the path I had to take. I mean, I did the military and got fairly comfortable with violence and harnessing that. And you have to integrate that into your persona so that you're a benefit to your community. And that means being gentle 99.999% of the time and being able to, protect people when you need to. But like, that doesn't start there. That starts with having a very low resolution understanding of reality. And that's where these 13 to 15-year-old guys are. And they see Tate, and Tate is better than what they are.
I have to strongly disagree. If you're a mom of a adolescent kid, the last person they need to be watching is any of the Tate brothers.
Now, men make men. And I know you disagree with me, but I'm telling you from a man's perspective, those young men need to go through their bad phase in order to tame it.
Well, I think you're both right in a sense, and these are kind of the mom and dad perspectives, really. I mean, so Christy's absolutely saying, like, I don't want my kid to follow a pimp. Sure. And Brooks, you're saying, well, it's better to be a killer or a pimp than to be incel prey that's going to kill yourself at 18. Yeah, that's true. Yes, but true. I would note that, like, that's like saying it's better to be a 3 than a 2 on a 1 to 10 scale. Like, that's why I put those things. So we need more guys that aren't complete bums producing young men's content. I think that's...
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that's the embryo stage. That's not the landing point. That's not where you want them to end up. You want them to get away from their loser traits but then they have to harness it. Then they have to find somebody better than a Tate to listen to, and that's somebody like Peterson.
Fair enough. Now it's 10:06, so we didn't get to some of our topics like transgenderism. We've just been talking about this. Became very interesting. We talked about the left, the right, new media. Why doesn't everyone kind of close with one final point you'd like to make? We'll get like an hour 20 in the can. Brooks, what's your final takeaway for today's conversation and episode?
No, I think Tally, your experience is a good one because it's inoculated you to a certain vulnerability. And when I mentioned, and Christy, I'll go back to the religious cult for a second. That experience inoculated me to groupthink, and now you've had that inoculation, and that's you shouldn't ever fall for that again. Which I won't because of that experience. So again, that's the pupa emerges from the chrysalis, etc. So these are phases that we go through, and I think you're much better off for having had the experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just say that I love your evolution. I love your story. I love how you speak about it. And I would definitely say I think that you have landed in a safe place, even though it probably feels politically homeless. It probably feels like in the middle of nowhere. I always chide these guys because I'm like, okay, I'm Brooks, I don't know if you're a registered Republican, but out of Charles and yeah. So yay. So I was the only registered Republican, but I would say if I had to do it all over again, I'm super jealous of the people in the middle and with the flexibility, right? To do that and to criticize both sides just equally, even though I do. But I love your story. I think it's powerful. I'm also kind of a walk away, but I was never liberal, so it's much different. So maybe we can talk about that sometime.
Boom.
Yeah.
All right. My brief close, because the guest always does the last one. I guess I think there are a lot of crazy people on the political left. There's probably a sort of outreach that movement has to people who aren't very successful, in all honesty. The idea that someone's holding you down, you're resisting, that's a term we hear constantly, so on. We're now seeing much the same thing on the right. I mean, the incel movement is guys who feel that an ambiguous foreign force is stopping them from getting what they want, but it's feminism or Jews or something like that instead of racism. Now, this is all just bullshit. I guess what Talia said strikes me as pretty logical. Decide how you feel about each individual issue. And that could vary from, abortion to trade with Lebanon. You don't have to just pick one package of things. But Talia, last word from you on you. What should people learn from you talking today, from your experiences?
Gosh, this is a hard question. I don't know. I obviously don't have it all figured out. I think that's a good thing. Maybe I think which I kind of mentioned earlier, that if I would want to imbue anything on other people is to not be so sure, not be so committed to an outcome or an idea. And I try, I think back to that conversation that I said I had with Benjamin Boyce that was recorded now about 2 years ago. And in watching it back, I'm so sort of unsure. I'm very tentative, and I'm very clearly, I'm at a place where I'm saying out loud, I don't trust myself. I got so many things so wrong for so long that I don't really have a gauge. I'm never too confident in any one of my beliefs. Now, about 2 years later, I'm more confident about some of my beliefs. And I don't know, I don't know how good that is even, really. I'm am I falling back into a place, where you just kind of keep on the road that, you keep progressing on the road that you're on and stuff. And, should I be sort of more tentative about some of these things? So that's I guess, a sort of wishy-washy thing that I would want to leave people with. But I don't know, I guess the very last part of this conversation is really interesting to me, and something that I think could be a whole episode of conversation is, what is liberalism, and what does it mean to be a liberal, to be liberal, because both sides of the political binary here, as a non-binary person here, both sides of this really use that word as a pejorative, and they use it they're talking past each other. And I remember coming from the left, I used to say that being a liberal was an insult. Of course, I'm not a liberal. Liberals are basically conservatives. That's how I felt when I was on the left. And then people on the right call crazy progressives who hate liberals, they call them liberals. And so I think there's like, we're totally talking past each other. And then like, who are these liberals? And I'm obviously one of them, but what does it even really mean? And is that a left or a right thing? And yeah, I don't know. That's kind of top of my mind right now. And where do we go? Because I kind of feel like what you were saying, Brooks, I do feel like there's sort of new alignments being set out. And I do feel like I fall in line with this sort of right of center alignment. But yeah, I mean, where is this all going? I don't know. Sorry, I don't have a very clear thought for you.
Never drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Never drink the Kool-Aid is a great closing statement. And I think in terms of Talia's last comment, there are probably a lot of sane people on sort of the center right, pay taxes and just want shit to work, which is basically my political take. On that note, Talia, Bongolan, Schwartz, thanks for coming on to the episode. Thanks to you guys for hosting.
Thank you, guys.
I got a country to save. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who let know you can't fuck with me. I got a country to save. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and a home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to save because I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.